I'm gonna give you now a very quick run through of the housekeeping rules for this session. So I think our colleagues are gonna share the slides. But basically, I would say that first, whenever possible, we would recommend you minimize distractions so you can get the most out of today's discussion. And also, we want you to feel very comfortable in sharing your views, your insights, and experiences. So, please regard this discussion as a place where, colleagues can share interests, and we would love to hear from you. So we encourage you to participate. We would also like to remind you that the chat box is always available for you to share, comments, views, and questions throughout the event. So, feel free to use it whenever you want. Also, I would say keep an eye on the chat, because we will be sharing resources and messages there. So if you would like to participate verbally, you can also do that. But the only thing we would say is just let us know, and you can raise your hand virtually by clicking on the hand icon that you would see on the screen. And then we will let you know when you can come in with your question. Another thing we would kindly ask of you is that, if you participate verbally, you turn your camera on, when you speak, so we can have that personal connection with you whenever, of course, whenever it's possible. And in terms of interpretation today, we have interpretation available in both Spanish and French. So if you require this resource, you can select the interpretation button on the panel, and that is represented by a globe that you can see on the screen. And then you can select the language of your choice. And I think if you wish to hear the interpreted language only, you can click the mute original audio, as you can see on the screen. Although we do not have interpretation from Spanish and French to English, if you wish to speak Spanish or French, feel free. We have those slides, jump in and help with the interpretation. I would like to Leticia Guimaraes, who is a senior global technical advisor for carbon markets, at the opening remarks of the session. So the floor is yours, Leticia.
Thank you so much, Emma, and good morning, colleagues. Many thanks for joining us and coming together today to exchange experiences and knowledge on how to improve gender considerations within the voluntary carbon market. As many of us know and have personally experienced, the effects of the climate crisis are becoming more extreme and pronounced every day. In response, many of us here, along with governments, private sector, civil society, women, men, youth in communities, amongst others, are undertaking a range of efforts at the global, national, and local levels to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and fight climate change. Alongside these efforts, there is a growing recognition that voluntary carbon credits can be a key vehicle for private sector investments in initiatives that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In response, the size and scale of the voluntary carbon market has increased dramatically over the recent years. With this, there has also been an emergence of various global initiatives aiming to guide the integrity of the voluntary carbon markets and accelerate a just transition, limiting the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. While good steps are being taken in developing gender equality and safeguarding criteria in promoting high-integrity carbon credits, recent research and global policy Dialogue suggests that there is currently in the VCM landscape a varying degree of social and environmental safeguards, with gender being often the least regarded aspect, sometimes even neglected. This is then compounded with the reality that women in many parts of the world face hurdles in being equitably and meaningfully included in climate action and associated decision-making processes. As many of us know, the reason for this ranges from cultural and social barriers in education, political participation, and decision-making processes to legal restrictions on access to capital, markets, and land ownership. Gender-blind activities in the VCM exacerbates these inequalities for women. However, this doesn't need to be the case. Gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but also smart economics. In increasing body of evidence, there is evidence to the gender-responsive climate action can deliver better carbon and climate outcomes, improve overall project sustainability, yield greater returns on investment, and more broadly contribute to sustainable development. For example, from the CDC Berkeley Haas School of Business Study shows that women in corporate leadership are more likely to proactively improve energy efficiency, invest in renewable energies, and adopt measures to reduce carbon emissions. So in other words, it would be a missed opportunity if the gender gap in the VCM are not fully recognized and addressed. And it is for this reason that the UN REDD program has been providing a catalytic support in 2023 to help increase the integration of gender within the VCM. This is also the reason why we are all here today to discuss this important topic. Thank you once again for being here with us on this journey. To briefly highlight, a first key piece of this stream of work under the UN REDD program involved organizing an online knowledge exchange and capacity building event on VCM with gender women-focused organizations in June. And I believe many of you had the opportunity to attend this event. This event aimed to provide a brief overview of the VCM landscape and obtain feedback from participants on their perspectives on challenges and opportunities in integrating gender within the VCM. While my colleagues will provide a more detailed summary of the feedback obtained in the June online event during this dialogue today, a key reoccurring issue that surfaced in these discussions was the reality of how gender inequalities within land tenure and ownership are reinforcing deep gender inequalities in the VCM, including related benefit sharing schemes and decision-making processes. For example, while women are a significant percentage of farmers and contribute to the generation of carbon credits, payments arrangements made through community schemes often do not involve women in decision-making processes. This is just one of many examples we heard, which reiterated the need to ensure that gender is not sidelined and forgotten in the VCM. It is with this dialogue today that we hope to continue to build on these discussions and hear from colleagues on ways to deal with these complex issues and find solutions in very imperfect conditions. This is not an easy task, but a needed one. On this note, I would like to thank all the presenters and participants for engaging with us in this topic. We look forward to the discussion and continuing these efforts to ensure gender equality becomes a rule and not an exception in the VCM. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leticia, for the opening remarks. And now, colleagues, let's continue having a quick look at today's objectives and the agenda. So just to summarize a bit the objectives of today's session, they include facilitating the knowledge exchange between gender and women's focus organizations in the voluntary carbon markets, as well as raising awareness on the importance of gender mainstreaming in this field of work. So we would like this event to be an occasion for participants to share good practices and lessons learned in all areas. So that would include governance, implementation, monitoring, and so on. And finally, we expect to provide participants with tools and examples and cases that can help them incorporate a gender perspective into the voluntary carbon markets. So in terms of how the session will be structured, our colleague, Elizabeth Eggerts, who is a UNDP REDD+ gender specialist, will start the session with a presentation on a business case for mainstreaming gender in the VCM. After that, we will discuss the current state of play, and that section will be divided into two parts. So for the first part, it will be dedicated to a brief overview of how gender is integrated into the VCM, and that will also be presented by Elizabeth. And then the second part will be an analysis of gender gaps in the VCM, and that will be carried out by Sue Phillips, who is the director of Gender Tech Enterprises. And just to let you know, there would be a Q&A at that point. And moving on, we will have our panel discussion about good practices and lessons learned with our guest panelists today. And that would be facilitated by our colleague from UNRED, Victoria Suarez, who is also a Safeguards Program Officer at UNEP. And again, here, there would be a Q&A, so there would be a room for a discussion with participants. And the last item of today's agenda will be basically analyzing the next way forward, and we will wrap up the session. So without further ado, let me give you the floor to Elizabeth Eggerts, who, as I said, will be presenting the business case to mainstream gender in the VCM. So the floor is all yours, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Emma. I appreciate it. And I just want to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to colleagues here. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have everybody here and participating and contributing to this very important discussion. So as you can see, we have a packed agenda today. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started in discussing the business case for mainstreaming gender within the VCM. And we're going to do a bit of a focus as well on the forest sector, given the fact that the VCM is quite the complex arena. So that will help to focus our discussion here a bit. So with that said, this business case that we're going to be providing, we've organized it in a way that's a bit more concise. And to do so, we have identified different key rationales for illustrating why gender and its importance in the VCM. So firstly, the first rationale is that, of course, it promotes a human rights-based approach to development. As many of us know here, gender equality is a human right that's enshrined in many different environmental declarations and conventions. Gender equality is also central for development, and it was established as established as goal number 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And is also included as a target across other SDGs as well. And what does this mean? Well, plainly stated, that women make up 50% of the world's population. So without their full participation and empowerment in such action, a just transition to net zero would not be possible. So the second rationale we have is that it will promote alignment to other international climate policies on gender. And the key one we're focusing here is on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And under the UNFCCC, the profile on gender has been raised on in many different decisions that have been taken over the years. And just to ensure that we stay on time today, I'm not going to go into detail on all of these. However, We will be sharing this PowerPoint with participants here as well as online after this workshop. So within the notes section, there's more details to how gender is integrated into each one of these different conference of the parties. So you had it first happen back in 2000, let me just hold on, I missed someone. Back in, I was trying to think of the year for COP 16, and that must have been 2010, I think so. So with the Cancun agreements for REDD+. And then we've also, throughout the years since then, there's been different actions taken, including a work program on gender at COP20, as well as at COP23, there being development of a gender action plan. And the key thing to highlight here was what transpired at COP26 in 2021 with the finalization of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And here, considerations on gender equality and the empowerment of women were embedded into it, along with the need for carbon credits to demonstrate that their contribution to the SDGs at the national level. So then moving on to our third rationale, and is that it would help to account for gender differentiation impacts. So why would this be important? Well, the reality is that gender differentiated impacts will almost always be present and result from any project, program, and policy looking to help fight climate change and or protect the environment and natural resources. And most of us have also seen this in our own work. And there are many different reasons why this is the case. Women and men have different roles they play in society. Women often experience more cultural, social, political, and economic barriers. They also have often a strong dependence on natural resources. And women and men also use and interact with natural resources differently. So, in other words, what might work for and benefit men might not work and benefit women or other marginalized groups. And then there's also how this looks for different stakeholder groups among them, and not just looking at as men as a whole or women as a whole. And so this is something that needs to be accounted for in any kind of project or program, and it's proven to help make it more sustainable. And this would then also apply to the VCM. And then the next rationale is, and this is our last one, is that women's equitable involvement is vital to the success of climate and REDD+ action. And for this, to help kind of illustrate these points, I have some hopefully somewhat convincing statistics that I can share with you now. So for example, women are effective leaders in achieving climate goals. So in one study, found that a critical mass of 30% of women on a company's board improves not only climate governance, but also innovation and a lower growth of emissions. So wherein it was only 0.6% compared to 3.5% for companies who then had no women on their board. And also women, in particular, rural and indigenous women, offer unique perspectives and expertise, as well as problem-solving capabilities. So just a bit to illustrate how this could be relevant. Women play a significant role in agricultural production and forest management, and make up 43% of the agricultural workforce globally, and often rising to over 60% in many low-income countries. And so what that means for a lot of the countries that are implementing carbon projects, it's really, women are proven to be a very key stakeholder that need to be involved, not just as beneficiaries, but also as decision makers, helping to inform the design, implementation, as well as monitoring of those projects. And then lastly, targeting women in climate projects can not only improve climate outcomes, but also lead to a more efficient use of climate finance. So to illustrate this, in a randomized trial that supported 44 forest users in Indonesia, Peru, and Tanzania, and required a 50% gender quota, in which that 50% gender quota was assigned to half of the groups. And it was found that the groups that had the gender quota conserved more trees in a payment for environmental services intervention, and then also shared that payment more equitably than those without the quota. So that's just a bit of food for thought to kind of see that this is hopefully kind of making the business case why it's important to be looking at gender and women's empowerment. But I do think most of us here do see that to be the case. But the struggle comes is, well, how do we go about doing that? And we'll get there a bit later on in the presentation and with our panel discussion. Some good practices and lessons learned in that regard will also be discussed. So just quickly, I'm going to be giving a very short overview of the current state of play of gender in the VCM. And what I'm going to be looking specifically here is really looking at how gender is currently integrated in the VCM. And just to note, this presentation was very much informed by the ASEAN Low Carbon Energy Program's report on integrating a gender lens in voluntary carbon markets. And one of the main authors of this report, Sue Phillips, is with us today, and she will be presenting after I will be. And it's really great to have her with us today for her to share her expertise and knowledge on the subject with us. But this is just to give an overview where much of this data comes from. And this has also been done for research as well, from just throughout what UNRED has also been doing. So let's go ahead and get started into looking on how is gender currently integrated in the VCM. So I've organized this across different topics. As we all know, the VCM architecture is quite large and includes various governance and institutional framework and standards and stakeholders and buyers and sellers and financial intermediaries. So we can't cover it all. We would probably need a good couple days workshop. So I'm just going to be focusing on the key aspects. And so with that caveat here, we're clearly not going to be covering it all, and there will be different aspects we might miss. But if you have any information that you would like to share with us, please share it with us in the chat, or also discuss it during the question and answer section. We would love to hear from you, because the more knowledge and information sharing on this topic, the better. So with this, I'm going to start speaking on our first topic that we've organized and looking at the global governance architecture within the VCM. And so just to put a bit of context into this discussion, as many of us know, that the rapid growth of the VCM over the years come with an emergence of different stakeholders, actors, carbon exchangers, advisory services, funders, and the situation is creating lots of opportunities, but also lots of challenges in ensuring environmental and social integrity of the carbon credits that are being generated and sold. So, and while there are other key global governance structures in place, the two I want to concentrate on here are the ones listed here. So the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, or also known as ICVCM, as well as the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, which I'll be referring to as it's commonly known as VCMI. So firstly, for ICVCM, well, actually maybe take a quick step back, that both of these initiatives came about between 2020 and 2021 in the context of the rapid growth of the VCM. And they're both helping to assist in shaping carbon markets, both their operations, as well as improving global regulation from both the supply and buyer side of the market. So the first one, ICVCM, has taken in various different steps to integrate gender within it. First of all, women are well represented within ICVCM's current governance structure. And again, the report that I highlighted a couple of slides back actually has some different statistics on how women have been represented, and I would definitely recommend to consult that document. It has also, in its core carbon principles, which were recently approved, It contains one criteria on gender equality, which requires proponents to ensure that any mitigation activity, one, provides equal opportunities in the context of gender, protects against and appropriately responds to violence against women and girls, as well as provides equal pay for equal work. And then with VCMI, there's also been different steps taken to integrate gender. Again, women are well represented within VCMI's current governance structure as well. And one of its 12 principles for voluntary corporate climate action is net positive benefit. And what this principle calls for is for companies to create net positive results and benefits to individuals and communities impacted by the supply and use of carbon credits. And this includes Indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and underserved communities. So now this is a great place to have gender or attention to women grounded within one of their principles. This said, there could be opportunities for VCMI to further integrate gender into their operations and guidance documents. Their current claims code of practice and its annexes does not explicitly mention gender or women's empowerment within it. That said, it does note that companies must provide information relating to how carbon promotes equity and generates co-benefits to ecosystems and local communities if they are associated with any additional third-party certification regarding social and environmental integrity. So there is this possible implied reference that could be tied to gender and women's empowerment, but it's not made explicit. So, and we're going to go ahead and now move on to talking about carbon market standards. And again, we are also going to have a bit of a focus here on the forest sector again. So to kind of, as much as I could summarize this up in one slide, which it proved to be quite challenging for me, to be honest, because there's so much to cover. What I went ahead and did was to organize this, noting what standards had strong gender integration, what had some gender integration, and then noted the ones that had little to no gender integration. And again, this is not all of the standards. These are the ones that most of us probably see in our work. But we didn't go down. We decided just to focus on these main ones. And to do this analysis, to kind of discuss what does it mean to then have strong gender integration. What we used here to discuss this was the similar requirements, I guess I could say, that was used in the report, integrating a gender lens into the VCM. And that really means that action's been taken on multiple fronts to integrate gender equality and women's empowerment. And this could be demonstrated both at the governance and policy level of the standard, as well as in programming and projects. So that could include any situational safeguards or risk analysis and mitigation and measures that are developed in response, including stakeholder engagement activities, actual project implementation itself, as well as monitoring and reporting. And then looking at, well, what does it mean? And just to know, this is the one standard that really stood out here was the gold standard. And we'll be hearing from the gold standard a bit later on in this dialogue. So I don't want to steal any of the points that they might have, but just to quickly note, they have a gender policy that guides all of their work and the mitigation activities that they certify. And they require a minimum that all of those activities need to meet a gender sensitive minimum criteria, and that is mandatory. And so I will stop there because I'm sure they will be sharing more on this, and it's great to have them with us today. So then moving on to the next one. So what does it mean to have some gender integration? That would mean, for example, that that they might do some of it. They might have at the policy or guidance level, or they might have some projects that are integrating gender, but it's usually not as, so comprehensive. And also that's maybe some of that guidance is a bit softer and not as mandatory as it could be. So it could be using terms as should or could instead of noting that it must, or that it's a mandatory action that needs to be taken. And again, we have here Vera, as well as their different standards, Plan Vivo, and then the REDD Plus Environmental Excellence Standard, which is also known as Art Trees. And this is where both all of these three standards have illustrated that they are definitely they're prioritizing gender and they're integrating some gender, but there's also opportunities for improvement as well. And then just to briefly cover the standards and programs that don't have much of any integration of gender are the Climate Action Reserve and the American Carbon Registry. So they might have a do no harm approach when it comes to social and environmental integrity, but that's where they stop. That doesn't get any more specific than that. So, and before going on to the next topic, I did just want to do a quick discussion on one more standard, and it's not a carbon standard, but it is a standard that can be used with any VCM crediting program. And it could be a deeper dive to help in the qualified assessment of gender outcomes within different crediting programs. And that is the W+ standard. And Jeanette, I just thought I would put this up there, and we have Jeanette Garong with us today, and she's the director of WOCAN, and she will also be talking in the panel today a bit later, and we'll be hearing from her. But I just thought this was very helpful to flag here because it's helpful. It was created to provide a robust, quantifiable methodology for assessing impacts of project activities on women. And it's designed to be used with carbon projects as well as non-carbon projects. But it allows women's empowerment to be measured, and could be a very useful tool in trying to maybe help address some of the gaps that we'll be discussing in just a few minutes. So, and then just quickly here, I thought it'd be helpful to provide a quick snapshot about how some different carbon market projects are integrating gender. And again, the results I will show came from the integrating a gender lens into the VCM report. And these results were as of fall of 2022, so about a year ago. So yeah, please look at these statistics with that lens. But this provides a bit of an overview of about the projects that are being offered now, where that all stands. So how many are integrating gender, what they currently have available, as well as also under Vera's SDG Vista, as well as Vera's CCB standard, and that is the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard. So again, just to be a bit cognizant on time, I'm gonna keep on moving forward, but here we kind of see a range of some statistics, and it's good progress, but again, we can see that there could be a bit of improvement in terms of how much gender is not that gender is just happening, but also that it's being measured. And that's part of the challenge, that there isn't enough supply of projects actually illustrating that there's been some kind of advancement on promoting, women's empowerment, and then also probably, hopefully gender equality as well. And then it's always the question on how do you measure and show that is proving to be some of the challenges. And then there's many different types of carbon market intermediaries as well. And there's been a bit of a range too on some steps have been taken with those carbon market intermediaries. For example, you have some rating agencies that are starting to look a bit more into, so social safeguards and social integrity, and prioritizing that within their rating systems, such as Severa as well as Calex. You do have some market exchanges as well, such as Climate Impact X. And what they're doing is they have actually developed they have their own internal rating system, and they actually have a gender indicator that is included as one of their measures for quality, and it's specifically focused on women's empowerment. And then last but not least, I just want to highlight that brokers are becoming more and more they're playing more and more of a larger role within the VCM. And there was just launched in 2022, Empower Co. is specifically a broker that's focused on women's empowerment. And it has the aim of looking to build global voluntary market for women's empowerment by selecting the most impactful women's empowerment projects and then linking them with mission-aligned buyers. And Empower Co. does sell W+ units as well. So with that said, I'm going to stop there. And thank you so much for following me in this discussion. And I know it's been a bit lengthy, but I do appreciate that. So with that said, I'm going to pass the floor back to my colleague, Emma, who will be introducing our next speaker. Thank you so much. Well, I say this, and I'm not sure if we've lost Emma. So, Sue, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Sue Phillips. Sue, thank you so much for being here with us today. Sue is a director of Gender Tech Enterprises, and I've been speaking about...
We're into the right for gender gap.
I think we might. I think we have. I think Emma's a bit cutting out. Sorry about that. So yeah. So right now I'm going to introduce Sue Phillips, and she will be discussing some of the gender gaps that are currently present within the VCM. And Sue, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for producing such a very helpful report that's very much informed all of this work. Yeah. So I just again, hats off to you, and I would like to pass the floor to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Beth, and hello everyone. Pleasure to be here today as part of this. Are there the slides, Beth? If we could get the slides up, then I can. Oh, there we go. Excellent. All right, so on to so part two. So this sort of part of the agenda is really looking at deepening perhaps some of the things that have been touched on so far, and looking at 5 gaps that that have emerged that we really wanted to draw out, and we'll go through each of those sort of 5 in turn. But essentially we're going to look at the gaps around carbon market projects and developers, around the standards. We look at national level action as well, and community level action, and the 5th and final, market and finance accessibility. And I have to say, this is obviously, a very quick overview. And I know the team have got some resources for those interested in digging deeper. So, this obviously what we presented is drawn from a number of resources that we're just going to have a look at. If we could move on to the next slide there, please. Where we're drawing the sort of this data from. Beth and others have also referred to the report that we were lucky enough to sort of be involved in and lead on this integrating a gender lens in voluntary carbon markets, which was undertaken in 2022, funded by the UK FCDO, and that was involved a real look at the market, state of play, through looking at standards, looking at research, and interviews across the ecosystem. So we draw on that report. We also draw on the online dialogue that was held in June, which is a sort of really useful bringing together of women's organizations and women that are working in the carbon markets and the wider sort of climate space, and from that the team, the UNREDD team, sort of set up a community of practice, and over the weeks leading up to this session today, had a series of online discussions to really help sort of tease out experience and examples of good practice around some of the sorts of key issues that are sort of emerging as sort of, you know, particularly challenging areas for furthering gender promotion of gender equality in carbon markets. So if we can go to the next slide and look at the first of those gaps. So this is just there for you to have a look at some of the key consistent messages, I guess, that are coming up around in the area of projects and project developers. And you know, just to sort of quickly run through those, you know, that this first one about the lack of projects acknowledging women, I mean, it's not surprising given the context that Beth and Letitia described of there being a historical gap there and a lack of recognition of the importance of women and gender equality in carbon markets. And to say here as well, whilst there are projects sort of acknowledging women, quite often it's more in a protecting women and do no harm, rather than the key word here is recognizing women as key contributors to those to carbon projects. We see an absence of women project developers. It's, you know, it's a very sort of historically quite a male-dominated sector for all sorts of reasons that we haven't got time to delve into here. But also, you know, in terms of today, where we do have examples, or you do have examples of women project developers, women-led, let's hear about them, because those are the ones that offer the knowledge, the learning of how those barriers that women face in becoming project developers can be overcome. There's a lack of incentives. You know, if the accrediting programs aren't asking for it, then, you know, what are the real incentives for project developers to really sort of integrate or consider gender sort of in any way? A real sort of very apparent gap of lack of gender expertise in the sector, you know, in contrast to the wider sort of climate space and the wider development space, where there's lots of gender expertise. So on the positive side, lots of expertise to draw on. We just need to be bringing it into this space, and I think that huge advances can be made if that's done. Beth touched on about the monitoring. I mean, yes, you know, what our work really highlighted was that where gender has been taken into consideration and sort of the effects on women are described, reported, it's often very, you know, qualitative, and as what buyers were telling us, fluffy, you know, and not really giving buyers a real sense of which are the projects that are really having meaningful impacts on women. So I think all of this is underpinned by not a lack of willingness, but a lack of awareness to date of why, you know, thinking about women and thinking about gender equality, bring a gender equality lens matters and makes a difference. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So this is looking again at the carbon market standards. It's great. I think we've got representatives from Vera and Gold Standard on the panel today, and they can, you know, share with us some of the things that are moving right now, because it is an evolving market. Historically, Beth has sort of outlined where the sort of standards stand, but we're seeing a shift now, and whether maybe, you know, ICVCM now establishing the gender equality and some clear criteria of what that means for accrediting programs, then I think we'll see an evolution in the market. And I think with VCS, we've already seen that, and it's really good to see that now sort of embedded in the latest version of VCS. Because up until now it's not been sort of mandatory, but I won't say too much around this because Beth already picked up on things, but just to say, perhaps picking up on the you know, the softness, you know, going down to the social environmental safeguarding requirements. And you know, and recognition that it's not an add-on or a nice to have, but something that really be good to see this sort of embedded in the standards, that it's something that's really absolutely vital to integrity and strengthens integrity, strengthens sustainability. Let's move on, because I think I can probably talk at length about each of those. I'm very conscious of time, and we can come back with questions there. So the third gap on gender at the national principle, Beth hadn't touched on this particular aspect earlier, and this is key, and particularly, I think, important at the current time with the the finalizations of Article 6 and since the end of 2021, you know, the governments, national governments, are moving quite quickly and increasingly sort of forward, putting their sort of architecture in place for the operation of carbon markets within their sort of within their areas of sovereignty. And so this is, this is an area where I think that lack of knowledge at the national level and the importance of integrating gender into carbon markets, it's really important, gap, and something that really needs support now as these frameworks are being developed to make sure that actually gender is there. The hooks, Beth talks about the hook that's already there with Article 6, but it's like, okay, but what does that mean? What can governments do to really sort of integrate gender in a meaningful way? And because the second point here, women are not well represented, and again, there's always examples of this not being the case, then they're not being active in governance and decision-making structures at that national level in relation to climate. They're not there in relation to carbon markets either. And I think, that's something to really need sort of looking at and closing that gap at this critical time. This slide also just picks up on one particular area around land tenure, because it's, again, what's happening at a national level, and that is key. And we know, and I'm sure there's resources available here for those who want to look further at this, but inequalities in land tenure systems obviously limit women's access to land rights. And that's so important to the many of the nature-based sort of solutions that are being supported and funded through carbon markets and looked to through carbon markets. And therefore, looking at ways to address that imbalance is absolutely key. And that was one of the things that the e-dialogue sort of looked at last week. So there are ways around that, that lack of tenure. But it's something that really needs to be honed in on as a very important restrictive aspect of carbon markets if we want to see meaningful engagement of women and them as real beneficiaries and benefiting equally. Next slide, please. And that talking about consistent messages. So this slide just attempts to summarize some of the consistent messages that are coming from the ground. Women's organizations, women's collectives, women entrepreneurs around carbon markets. And the first is just that lack of knowledge at that level. There really is a big gap in knowledge, and not just a gap in actually knowing about carbon markets, but how that information about carbon markets is communicated to those organizations. And the fact, so if without having that knowledge and access to knowledge about carbon markets, that's actively excluding women and women's organizations at the local level from getting involved. We're also seeing then a lack of women's voice in decision making. Real barrier. We're seeing with the standards evolving, that may be more specific reference to women, but where are the where are the sort of where's the consistent messaging about expecting that to be equal, expecting the need for change in terms of how to get women's voice sort of into decision making. It's not enough to say, well, we tried, but actually, you know, what does that say? You know, what does that mean? That means that is it that women are not participating, or is it the mechanisms have been designed in a way that actually don't facilitate women's sort of participation and decision making? The benefit sharing, another key area, like actually thinking about women, looking at where the benefits are flowing. I've not seen any data, loves to see some data that sort of might show the disaggregation or gender disaggregation of benefit flow. But as this has been picked up on within the market as an area where we need to see more equity and benefit sharing amongst communities, but making sure that there's a real gender lens in there so that we really know where those benefits are flowing, and that they're flowing to the right people, and they flow to women as much as to men, and to women who, not just for themselves, but for how they spend that money sort of on and benefit their communities. So have to design in a specific through a specific gender lens. And then finally, the point about women being overloaded, and yes, that's a key message that comes back. But again, let's listen to women, let's get women's organizations involved and hear how they would like to see engagement sort of designed in a way that makes it easier for them to contribute. Let them tell us, not us tell them. So there's some of the examples, and these are things that as the market evolves, that 4 really great hooks, I think, to use to think about how to design these mechanisms that actually address these 4 key barriers. And I think finally, and I'm probably well into my time, to the next slide, which is just about such an important gap, and is the finance. And these are some of the messages that consistently are picked up. And there's plenty of stats in that report and elsewhere around the sort of lack of finance going down to sort of women's organizations, and within the carbon markets, you know, the statistics on how much is getting down to communities, let alone to women sort of within those communities. And women's organizations, collectives are starved. I mean, the stats there, but literally starved of resources. And we hear a lot of rhetoric about organizations wanting to get money to women's organizations, to women involved in climate action. So one of the key considerations here is looking at the lending criteria, and designing specific mechanisms. I see the slides have disappeared, so that's obviously time for me to terminate, but I think we're at the end there. But design, what I really want to say there is to see those finance mechanisms designed in a way that really work for women, and getting women involved in designing those mechanisms so that they really do reach their intended audience. And I think on that note, I better wrap up and hand back to Beth.
Let me come in. I hope you can hear me now. But thank you, Sue, for your presentation. So I think it's a good time to open the floor for colleagues to ask any questions. So you can either, write your question in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand virtually and, just let us know that you want to ask a question. So Linda from Gold Standard, she's asking if there is a tendency in the presentations to equate gender women. So is there any analysis on gender diversity and VCM?
There's analysis on gender diversity and VCM. Linda, could you just jump in and maybe expand on that question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thank you for the presentations. So most of the analysis is in regards to relationship men and women, but there are other diversities within that spectrum. So normally we tend to identify gender as just women, talking about women and mentioning women. But what about the other diversities and other interpretations and identities? I think if there's limited information on gender in general, I guess diversity has not been represented. But I don't know if from your expertise you have heard about the participation of other unrepresented groups in the VCM scenario.
Beth, should I just jump in and then pass to you if you've anything to sort of add? Because I think, it's a really good point, and thanks for raising that, Linda. And I think, we can often sort of use the sort of gender, we can be talking about gender equality and then we're talking about women's empowerment, and of course they're not the same thing. In terms of the report that we worked on, and in terms of ICVCM, it was very clear that, like, using the term gender in terms of diversity and not in a binary way. So, and I think that the way that, say, VCS has taken that up and the use of the terms sort of adopted by ICVCM is the same. But I think in terms of evidence, most of the work that's been done on gender equality in carbon markets is very much sort of focused at sort of work on women's empowerment. That's very true. And I mean, and that is a specific objective in its own right. But Beth, did you want to jump in and add to that?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sue. I am so sorry I got kicked out. I don't know if you realized all of a sudden I think I missed part of or most of Linda's comment. I'm so sorry about that. So I'm not sure I can adequately respond, but just hearing your response, which I did hear, is how to go about measuring that and where gender falls. I think, I would have said a similar response, I think. So, but again, my apologies, because I only heard the last sentence of Linda's comment.
Beth, if it helps, her comment is in the chat, her question.
I don't think, because I joined.
She was wondering if there's a way to not use the same term, like to focus gender just in women, gender equal women, but if there's a way to analyze and to document a bigger diversity, gender diversity, and how is this related to voluntary carbon markets?
That is a very good question. So I think that's just doesn't just talk. It's a good question just for VCM, but just in overall in any kind of climate change and natural resource management work we do. A lot of times gender gets equated with just being about women, and it's often so much more than that, and it's looking all across the spectrum, across different stakeholder groups, across different genders, and as Sue said, just not being specific, looking at women and men, particularly is where this is evolving in today's world, and speaking in more non-binary terms, and how does that get represented? And a lot of that bases on what data is available. And I think it's still a struggle to collect data on women or men or male and female, let alone looking across other aspects, which we need to do, but that just shows like where the discussion needs to go. And then I think we can start talking larger, more gender more broadly. But I do think, just having some discussions that, looking at women and measuring, having it be focused on women, it's a good first stop, I guess, because I think within the voluntary carbon market, there is, I sometimes equate this that, where we were with the climate discussion or climate finance discussion 10 years ago is kind of where we are now with the discussion around gender and the carbon markets. And so you almost have to look at the lowest hanging fruit. And so to tackle, okay, this is what we need to do now. This is where capacity is. This is where awareness is, and start working our way up, because the carbon market it's an arena is huge. And so a good start to that is looking at women and measuring women's involvement, and And again, it's not an end all be all, but we have a kind of a point to start somewhere that we can then build on to then start tackling these larger issues, these larger scopes. Like, how do you measure gender equality? That's a much larger thing than maybe measuring women's empowerment. And so it's more dynamic, it's more comprehensive, it's more complicated. So, and to take that one step at a time. And I think I'll stop there because I know we're running a bit late. So thanks, Victoria, for reading that.
Just a comment from Jeanette. She's like following up with Linda's question, and she's saying that perhaps Linda is referring to intersectionality, the diversity of women with various identities. And she also mentions that there are, questions of attribution and claims. And her question is, can projects attribute changes in gender relations to their activities?
So yeah, so I don't know, Sue, or yeah, I don't know if this is an open question. It's a very good question. So
can I step in?
Yes, yeah, please. I was going to, but yes, this is great. Yes.
So it's Claire from the Gold Standard. And so I would say in our standard, the way, and I'll talk a bit about this when we go onto the panel, but in our standard, the way we develop our rules and requirements is with a kind of design, like integrated approach. So it enables people on the ground to look at what specific contexts are there around, and it kind of enables them to pull that together. So the way we structure our standard provides that flexibility to enable different setting of targets and performance indicators. And so there is that optionality to start looking at some of these indicators. It's just making sure, I guess, what might be lacking is some of the data to go around it to help support it. But from a kind of standard setting perspective and looking at quantifying some of these impacts, there is that flexibility already in place. So there we are.
Yeah. Can I just jump in?
Yeah,
okay, just to say, because that's well picked up there, Claire. But it reminded me of a point that I wanted to make and didn't, which is to sort of, we're seeing now with some of the standards sort of increasingly think, great, they're thinking about gender. Maybe I see VCM now sort of forcing those that haven't, like Gold Standard already, been well ahead on this. Is that, but it's like, okay, how much is it to sort of develop those sort of criteria? Is that, because that can, even with the criteria that are there now, they can still be box ticking, and so, I think to really make those sort of meaningful and to really make them stick in the market and bring about change in the market needs to go with guidance. So this is just a classic, really good question around that. It's like, okay, well, what do we mean by gender? What do we want you to measure? Are we talking just men and women? So, I think it raises the wider point about it, not being good enough just to have those sort of criteria now, but to provide guidance and support for the market. Because I think, our work picked up there's a willingness, but there's that lack of awareness. Well, how do we do it? Where do we look to? And there's lots of materials out there, in the wider, gender and climate that can be drawn on, but with it's getting those to the people, like to the programs, to the project developers, so they actually sort of know how to can actually move forward with the go through the doors that have been opened up now in a really meaningful way to make a real difference. Great.
Definitely. No, thanks for that, Sue. Just being mindful of the time here, I think it's best that we now move on to our panel discussion. But if any other colleagues have any comments or questions or information that you would like to share, please just drop it in the chat, and we will be following up with any unanswered questions or comments and sharing the summary of those with all the participants here today. So just to know, it won't go unanswered, or that it won't, that make sure that it'll be shared with everyone here, even if we don't have time to discuss it right now. So really thank you for these helpful questions and comments and feedback. It really helps to kind of, we just have to, brainstorm and troubleshoot together on how we can kind of move this work forward. So this is great. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague, Victoria Suarez, who will be leading the discussion on the panel discussion with VCS, Vera, Gold Standard, and W+ colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Beth. Now we will move to the panel discussion on good practices and lessons learned in integrating gender into the VCM. I am pleased to introduce 4 great panelists who join us today. These are Claire Wheelers, Senior Manager for Market Relations at Gold Standard. Also, Anna Mortimer, Senior Program Officer at Vera. And Ba Tambor Lindo, Project Director of Plan Vivo's Cassie Hills Community Red Plus project. And finally, Janet Gurung, Executive Director of WOCAN and W+ Standard. We will ask 3 questions to each panelist. You will have about 8 minutes in total, and I will be sharing the questions. And after these responses from the panelists, we will also have a moment for question and answers from the participants of the event. So I would like to start in this case with you, Claire, if I may. Could you please tell us and provide a brief overview of the Gold Standard gender policy? Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. This is a topic very close to my heart, so I'm very, very excited to be here with everyone today. So the Gold Standard gender policy, I mean, Letitia already at the beginning of this presentation touched on how empowering women and girls is like one of the most effective ways to fight climate change. And Gold Standard, we've always taken a holistic approach at looking at climate and development. It was kind of why we were originally created 20 years ago by WWF. It was WWF and a number of other NGOs had huge concerns about emission reduction projects having negative impact to local areas where they are situated. And so they developed Gold Standard. So Gold Standard was a set of rules and requirements that ensured climate projects didn't harm those local communities. And that's where we started. And so over time, we've continued to build on this mantra. And now not only do our projects do no harm, and we have safeguards in place to enable that, but they also have to positively contribute to multiple SDGs. So any Gold Standard project has to deliver against SDG 13, which is climate action, but at least 2 other SDGs. And so this ethos really runs through our gender policy as well. And so we've got a commitment to enhance and promote gender equality, social inclusion, female empowerment. I'm very lucky I work in a company that is very much a tech-based NGO, essentially, and more than half of the team are female. Our CEO is female, our technical team, more than half of that's female. So it's a very nice place to work in. And so for our gender policy, it really applies across our organisation. So we have it at like an institutional level. And so this covers us in the Secretariat, it covers our board, it covers our technical governance committee. But I think what's really important about this is it also covers our projects that are certified to our standard. So our policy, and Elizabeth touched on this earlier as well, but our policy requires all Gold Standard projects to be gender sensitive. And that's regardless of type or scale of activity. So gender sensitive, what does that actually really mean? It means that a project design has to take into account the overall societal context. So if a host country has gender policies, they need to be considered. If there's national gender strategies in place, they need to be considered. The second point is that we have safeguarding principles. And so that goes against our kind of do no harm. So within our safeguarding principles, every project has to comply with principle 2, which is gender equality and women empowerment. And then our third point is that every project within Gold Standard has to have a local stakeholder consultation. And that's a hugely important part of our process, because having that local stakeholder engagement or engagement with anyone that's impacted by the project really enables the long-term success of that project. And so all stakeholder consultations have to be done in a gender sensitive way. And so that's kind of like a nutshell what our gender sensitive covers there. And it's really to make sure there's no harm done. So across any activity that's going on, to ensure that there's safeguards in place to prevent any perverse or to mitigate any adverse impacts. And that goes on women or men and girls and boys. So it's across everyone. And that's really kind of what every project has to deliver. And then our policy goes on further than that. So we then have a gender responsive policy, and our gender responsive policy is optional at the moment. And that's can be applied to activities that are really proactively looking at a gender responsive approach. So what does that mean? So that means that it's like those projects do deeper gender analysis, and they use that to determine their baseline. So they look at the different situations between men and women, for instance. They look at the impact of the project and what impact that will have on the different gender groups. And then from that kind of analysis, they can kind of build out a baseline. And then from the baseline, once that's determined, they can look at kind of how to design a monitoring framework that enables you to set gender responsive targets and enable you to set performance indicators. And so a performance indicator can be looking at addressing women's time poverty, for instance, or it can be looking at improving a woman's asset position in relation to a man. It can be improving women's agency. It can be improving her capacity to influence the project design, or even kind of going broader and influencing kind of more societal changes. And so you start pulling together these indicators. And then the third part of that is really going out there and monitoring the project against that framework and those baselines that have been determined. And so what we're trying to achieve with this kind of gender responsive certification is like actual project performance. So it's going beyond do no harm, and it's going into actually we're going to do a lot better. And so our that's a kind of optional part at the moment. Our love and hope, like any of the work we do, is that we'll start moving that through, and that will start to become a mandatory part of our process. So there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. I would like to move now the floor to Anna. Anna, can you please provide a brief overview of how gender is integrated into the VCS, the Verified Carbon Standard of VERA?
Hi, yes, thank you so much for having me as part of this important discussion. As you mentioned, my name is Anna Mortimer. I use she, her pronouns, and I work on VCS program innovation. So VCS program is more of a traditional carbon first program, meaning that benefits are directly measured, are the carbon benefits. We do have a no net harm provision, but as the market expanded and moved to providing more guidance and more requirements around gender, the VCS program has evolved to that. And so now we have multiple pathways of demonstrating non-carbon benefits and providing safeguards and integration of gender in a few ways. So within the standard itself, we have safeguards related to gender, such as equal pay for equal work, equal employment opportunities at all levels, equal opportunity to participate in stakeholder consultation and implementation of project activities, and safety for women and girls in all marginalized groups. In addition to stakeholder consultation, projects must analyze and understand how all the stakeholder groups, specifically gender, interact with each other and how projects will impact those interactions. In addition, we have integrated sustainable development goals reporting into the VCS standard. So now above this requirement on gender, we have opportunities for projects to showcase these activities that are aimed at non-carbon benefits as a result of or financed by project activities such as gender equity, Currently, it's an option for projects to do a separate report to be submitted in conjunction with VCS projects. However, it does not result in additional labels or claims. So I'll talk about our other programs a bit that do allow that, but this is just integrated within the VCS program, and it will be a requirement for all projects as of 2025. So as of 2025, all projects will be required to demonstrate non-carbon benefits within project templates and as part of their VCS verification. So we know gender empowering activities can be captured in other SDGs, not just not just 5, gender equity. So there will be the opportunity to report on any contributions there. Additionally, I think one of the great strengths of the VCS program is that it's designed so that it can be used in conjunction with other programs that demonstrate non-carbon benefits, such as gender equity and empowerment. So there are 2 programs that are managed by Vera that come to mind for land use projects, and I think are the best to highlight. So the CCB program, the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity program, is intended for usage with land use projects, and it provides a pathway for verification of benefits such as employment for women in project activities at all levels, design projects focusing on net positive impacts on the well-being of women and gender. And on top of all of these requirements, there are requirements for gender-based participation. This program actually does allow for a label to be added to a VCU. So when it's used in conjunction with a VCS project, it allows for extra, an extra certification and extra verification that just says, not only do we provide carbon benefits, but we also provide all of these other benefits. And that is just an extra way for projects to show the integration of gender into their activities. And we also have the SD Vista program, which is focused on demonstration of activities that contribute to nationally determined contributions and are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, such as SDG 5, gender equity. And this allows for claims and labels and assets, which those 3 ways of demonstration provide different forms of financial benefits and also indicate different levels of verification, but are all pathways that projects can use these additional benefit programs to demonstrate their robustness and their intent to focus on things other than just reducing or removing carbon emissions. Additionally, the VCS program works with the W+ program. I won't speak too much to it because Jeanette will speak next, but this program does focus on women's empowerment and can be used in addition to the VCS program. So I think one of the unique things about the VCS program is that we do have that option for VCS program specific related gender activities and reporting and safeguards, but then also we do allow for this joint program approach where a project can go above just reporting on the requirements in the VCS program, but also then to reporting on other activities that can contribute to gender empowerment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. Now I would like to welcome to the floor Ba Tambor. Could you please tell us and provide a brief overview on how the project you lead on has supported women's empowerment? Thank you.
Good evening. Greetings from the Khasi Hills Community REDD+ project headquartered in Mount Lang. I would like to present you the project that we are doing, where we are giving the top priority for the women to take part in the project. As you know, the plus sign in the red includes requiring projects to respond to gender and equity issues, while ensuring the equity in the distribution of project benefits. The importance of women's involvement in the project implementation goes well beyond the simple sharing of benefits. The Khasis, you should know that the Khasis are a matriarchal society, both matrilocal and matrilineal. The land and the houses from the mother pass from the mother to the youngest daughter, while the uncles or the men, they play the important role in the community development and community leadership. But women drives much of the economy. You see, REDD+ that seek to compensate the participating families and community for protecting and conserving their forests and carbon sinks have options how to distribute the benefits. We have the options to distribute the benefits. So some projects simply give cash to the families. In the case of the Khasis, the strategy is the benefit is distributed in multi-pronged, so in multiple ways. So when we are saying about how we empower women or how we establish the women-run enterprises, we first of all give them a role in the lower working committee. That means a decision-making body next to the village level, because the project is run by a federation of the traditional institutions where men dominated everything else. But through the project, we intervene or we advise that women should be also participating by taking up the space of 50% men and 50% women representation. And besides that, in each and every village, we are establishing women-run micro-enterprise we call the self-help group. I'll talk more in the second question and the third question. So that is all from my side.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that perspective from a project implemented on the ground. To finalize this first round of questions, Jeanette, I would like to welcome you. And could you please provide a brief overview on how the W+ standard helps to monitor women's empowerment? Women empowerment.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Obviously, there's a lot to say, but I'll keep this brief. So the W+ standard is a framework. It's a standard. It's a certification system that measures, quantifies, and monetizes women's empowerment within projects and within supply chains. And by doing so, it generates W+ credits that are tradable assets. They're like carbon credits in that way. So as mentioned by Beth, it's a standalone standard. We don't necessarily have to link it to climate or to carbon projects. However, as mentioned by Anna, we do have the opportunity to either embed the W+ into a Vera project or to stack it onto a carbon credit produced by another carbon standard. This is the critical aspect of the W+ that I think is unique to us is that it has a requirement for a benefit sharing out of the revenue that's generated from the sale of the credits. Project developers need to spend at least 20% of that value needs to be allocated to women's organizations, local women's organizations within the project area. Why is that? Well, because WOCON's mission is to advance women's empowerment and collective action to tackle climate change and poverty and things like this. So we've been doing this for over 20 years, and we've been focusing a lot on gender mainstreaming within agriculture, forestry, natural resource related organizations. When we took a hard look at that in about 2012, we realized that that's not just training people in gender was not having desired results. And we needed to incentivize project developers and these agencies to increase their attention and resources spent on gender equality and women's empowerment. And as our primary mission is to provide revenue to, as Sue described, the starving organizations that are women's collectives around the world. So we were inspired, we were learning about carbon standards. This was back in 2012, 2013. We were learning about carbon standards and understanding that as a potential way to drive new attention, financial resources down to a project level. And we had this wild idea, why can't we do that for women's empowerment? And by doing so, provide more resources to women's organizations in two ways. One, through the benefit sharing mechanism, but also through the fact that the project is just having more activities that are oriented towards women's empowerment. So we had meetings with women's organizations we were partnering with in rural communities in Nepal and in Kenya. We said, what does empowerment mean to you? Amazingly to me, they both designated the same 6 areas, which are time, health, income and assets, knowledge and education, food security, and leadership. So our team created the methodology that combines both qualitative and quantitative indicators to be able to measure results in those areas. We are not measuring, we will not call it a gender standard, because we are of the opinion that in order to attribute a change and to make a claim, it needs to be something that is bounded by something that it can be controlled by a project. And we feel women's empowerment falls under that specific requirement. Talking about gender relations is a much bigger thing that reaches out to changes in policies and cultures and things like this. So we developed it it's very similar to a carbon standards architecture. We use the same processes. However, we require that gender analysis is done as part of the process. Also, the consultations with the women's organizations is key and fundamental to the process. Newly added for the W+ standard are we now require projects to show intentionality for women's empowerment goals. So even if they don't, and working with forestry related organizations, we often don't see very ambitious goals for women's empowerment and gender equality, let's be honest. So we want to take projects from where they are and use the standard and the indicators of the standard to get them to a higher level. But we need to see that there's real commitment on this from the project right from the beginning. The other key piece of it is that it's not do no harm, it's far beyond that, it does include that, but it also has independent third-party verification that is not done by carbon professionals, but is done by social impact professionals that know how to verify there's real impact on the ground. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We heard, of course, this was a brief overview on how gender was integrated at the policy level, at the standards level, also in a project implemented on the ground, and finally from a standard that focuses on women's empowerment. And now we would move to discussion on challenges and lessons learned. But I would like to welcome the panelists to share any links or further details on resources you have available in case you want to put that for the participants to access and review the information later. Claire, getting back to you, could you please tell us one key challenge or lesson learned in implementing the gender policy and the elements you mentioned before, and how Gold Standard addressed this challenge? I know you probably can think of a lot of different challenges and lessons learned. So if you could pick one that should be highlighted, that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? The key challenges, because in our line of work, there's a lot of those. I think, like at Gold Standard, we're always trying to innovate and we're always trying to raise ambition. As a not-for-profit, we're always thinking about what is the right way to do things. But with innovation, there often comes a lot of unknowns, right? Because it's new, it's never been done before. So, and there's gaps in data, or there's academic studies haven't covered some of the issues that we want to try and address. And so how do we ensure that we develop requirements that are robust and conservative and ensure integrity, which are all essential parts of working in a market environment, but that are also fit for purpose and can be actually applied in the field and are actually going to make a difference? And so there's things that we do to try and work around this. So, you know, whenever we develop requirements, we try to pull together as many subject matter expertise as we can. So with the gender work that we're doing, we reach out to lots of different organizations that work in that space. And that's organizations both within markets, but also outside of markets, to really get that perspective and to make sure that what we're developing makes sense. And we follow the latest science, the latest data, academic studies that are available, or try to follow as many as we can. And then we look at if or how these can be implemented or featured in our rules and requirements to help support that work. we listen. So we have public consultations that go out for any new developments that go out, and that takes into consideration all feedback and all different perspectives. We also pilot requirements as well. So we can use piloting schemes to see how the projects work on the ground. And we regularly review our requirements. And so that's part of our ICEAL compliance, but it's also enables us to make adjustments to support applications. So where that works in our gender responsive guidelines is we originally published these back in 2017, but we've published a newer version of these requirements this year. And so these newer requirements are more streamlined. They have more access to additional resources because they're available now. And they have more materials to help support the monitoring of gender impacts. And so the idea of this is to really kind of make the application of these requirements easier for projects to apply. So we can get a broader spectrum, we can get more projects doing it, and more projects featuring these important issues. And so it kind of goes back to that point I made before about pushing the needle towards every project being gender responsive. That's what we're trying to do with this.
Thank you very much. And to wrap up with you, could you please tell us about good practice? What would be a good practice that you would mention from gold standard experience?
Well, I've got a good example. So we've just issued the first ever gender responsive credits from our a safe water supply project in Uganda. And so it was developed by a project developer called CO2 Balance. And so this it's called the Lango Safe Water Project, and it provides communities, so it's 40,000 people with access to safe water. So it's reducing waterborne diseases. It's saving women on average 4 hours per week, so they can focus on other income generating activities. Girls can go to school. There's nearly half of the local water committees. So local water committees are kind of committees set up to manage the maintenance and the operation of the boreholes. And these are now, now nearly half of these are women, which is unheard of in that community. And then reported domestic violence incidents linked to water collection have dropped to 0 compared to 35% before the project. So, and all of this whilst reducing emissions. So I guess the point here goes back to that rationale that Elizabeth was talking about. It's like really proving it's possible to fight climate change, but also positively contribute to other issues like gender.
Thank you very much, Claire. Anna, I would like to bring you again to the floor. Similar question, could you please share with us one key challenge or lesson learned in integrating gender into the voluntary carbon market from VCS perspective or the other standards that you have under VERA, how you address this challenge, and finally, if you have any good practice that you would like to highlight.
Yeah, great, thanks. So one of the things that we know through VERA and through the VCS program is that the best practice for projects, the most successful projects, are projects that include non-carbon benefits or demonstrate how project activities and interventions have already have these additional non-carbon benefits. So since the VCS program is, a carbon first program, understanding how we can both require gender equity within the VCS standard, but also within the other non-carbon standards and how they interact has been a little bit of a historic challenge for us, but one I think we're continuing to make improvements on. I think one of our biggest lessons learned is that it's not enough to just have gender equity and inclusion as a requirement or as an additional benefit to be measured. So we need to do both. We need to figure out how our programs can both require gender equity, but also provide pathways for projects to really demonstrate and highlight those aspects of their projects that go above and beyond just equal pay for equal work, equal opportunity in employment at all levels, and equal opportunity in consultation. So I think really the strength of the VCS program is that now that we have both of those aspects, we have these opportunities within the program and with additional programs to demonstrate these additional benefits, but we also now have requirements to allow and ensure that projects are providing these opportunities in the context of gender. So I think, good practice example for us is just, we decided it was time to that demonstrating that projects have benefits. It's not just that anymore. We need to be providing gender equity as a requirement and a space in project participation, because it is a safeguard and it's a right that must be protected in project activities. So successful, long-lasting community-based projects are one with full community engagement. Even if they don't use joint programs, it's not enough to just require equal pay for equal work and employment opportunities and other gender-based opportunities. We need to be representing gender in consultation and design. And so when projects use these additional programs, they often can highlight that and design their projects in a way that they can showcase that and provide those opportunities. So I think land use projects under the VCS program are a great example. Most of them are CCB projects as well. So most of them use this additional standard to highlight and demonstrate that not only are they meeting requirements around gender equity, but they really are designing their project in a way and measuring their project in a way that shows that these activities that are generating carbon benefits, but then there also are activities that might be generating other kind of benefits, that they can be done at the same time and they can be verified in a robust way. And so these types of projects can often, harness the power of carbon finance to provide microfinance loans, education opportunities, better maternity health care, and training for all genders in new practices and job opportunities outside of the traditional gendered spaces and roles, in addition to requirements on gender inclusion. I think best practice for us is going to continue to rely on our experts in our advisory groups that we work for as we continue to evolve our program. We're going to be releasing a new version of the VCS standard within the next year or so. That's going to be a potential very large step change for the VCS program. And so relying on these experts to help us continue to improve what we know is best practice and the right thing for projects to be doing, but also the direction that the market is heading to. I think that's going to allow us to really harness the power of the voluntary carbon market to protect gender equity, but also go above and beyond and provide opportunities for gender equity in a way that hasn't historically necessarily been part of carbon programs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. On a similar question, Bat Tambor, could you please tell us from the perspective of the Khasi Hills Community REDD Plus project, one key challenge or lesson learned that you came up in supporting women's empowerment, how you address this challenge, and if you have a good practice that you would like to share with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to share with you, because if there is no problem, there is no inclusion. You see, because when we see that there are problems, because when we are trying early on the project develop a community development plan where we are keeping to the village, where each and every village will project to us with a sanction that we have to them. They will decide, and then it will go to the LWC, and by the intervening of the LWC, that means lower working committee, where women are there, then we have seen that these villages come up with the projects like improving of water resources, waste management, schools, and health delivery, especially for pregnant women. We are working in a village where the people are delivered their babies in their home. So we are having also a problem. We know that the Khasi women are competent entrepreneurs, but they lack capital, they lack equipment, they lack training, and they lack market access. So the project decided to support and re-energize these groups by asking them to select the community leader from the villages, the women community leaders from the village or the SHGs to be the community facilitator. And each and every village, because we are having 86 villages from the 10 HIMA, then each and every village, they will have to elect or select the one lady youth volunteer, where she will be assisting the team, because we have a team, the forestry team, the socioeconomic team, and the other teams. But the socioeconomic team is looking only for women, actually. So they are also they are the one who help them to help they are helping the village through the community facilitators. They are providing the small grants. We organize trainings. We have also involved people when we are seeing all these problems, then what we have been learning is that we involve them in a kind of activities. They have producing mushrooms, vermicomposting, composting, like the vermicompost, I mean to say the temporary fruit trees cultivation, the free nurseries, the polyhouses, the high value vegetables through the polyhouses, I mean to say, and also the floriculture where women love so much, and as well as food processing and the homestays. Because the third team that we have is a tourism team, and as you know, I was told you earlier that the land and the houses pass through the women's side. That means so the people now, because our place is very rich in the scenery and the landscape is very beautiful. We have a lot of waterfalls. We have thousands of caves. We have thousands of sacred groves and all. So these villages, we are encouraging them with to use the home as a homestays for the tourists, and the tourism activities is also flourishing through women intervention. So that is my second question. I think I will be coming again for the best practice if you are asking me the same time, or I will like to come in the third question.
If you could already share the best practice from your side, that would be helpful.
You see, when we are talking about the REDD Plus, some projects they have the term is just 3 to 5, but REDD Plus usually have the extended lifetime, allowing project purpose to engage in community institution building, entrepreneurial development, capital formation. So to support women project developers, we have to look beyond the simple cash distribution. We are not looking at cash distribution. Some projects they are doing the cash distribution, but we seek guidance from the community women on how best to make a long-term investments in the institutions and economy. So over the 12 years time that we are running the project, the SHGs have been growing a lot, and we are having the SHG Meet and Fest. I think I would like to tell again, SHG means self-help group, where women are running a microfinance institution, where they will be pouring. I mean, they will be contributing their own money, and they are giving the funds to. They are giving loans without interest to their own loan with minimal interest to their members as well as community members. And through the 250 SHGs that we are establishing, we also form federations, and these are very effective because the addition of revenue to the carbon offset sales, the project has been especially effective in drawing in funds, technology, and other resources from the government of India. Because this SHG concept is made applicable by the government of India. So these organizations through the SHGs as well as the federation, they are able to we are this network of British women leaders and organization, the project team works. We guide them where they can tap the resources and also leveraging the government funds, and that will increase the benefits to flow the women's organization. See, this is the best practice that we have, and we also we already see India is going to enhance the women empowerment, and our project has been able to do this even in a smaller way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we go into receiving questions from the participants of this event, to finalize, Janet, with you, can you also share with us one key challenge or lesson learned on using the W+ standard on a project, how you address this challenge, and also a good practice that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, thank you. One of the key practices that we found is that inside the projects using the W+, there's a lack, I think Sue mentioned this, there's a lack of capacity related to not only gender, but also social impacts. And measuring social impacts is not as easy as measuring carbon. Carbon is kind of this fixed thing. I'm a forester. By training, we all learn how to measure carbon. Social impacts is a different thing. The W+ is a rigorous standard. And I think even getting people to understand how you measure outcomes and not just outputs. So for example, in leadership, we're measuring the impacts of leadership. So what does it lead to? Not how many women are trained in leadership, for example. So this is for us a part of the rigor. And I think, we have to also be careful about pink washing within all of our standards, and trying to take it to the next level and not just have projects check a box or self-determine their own indicators for success, which is in some cases the problem. We could be subject to the same kind of rigor and questions that the carbon market has been subject to about integrity, unless we pay a lot of attention to this. So this is one of the things, the way we are addressing the challenges. One, WOCON offers that kind of technical assistance as an option, only as an option for project developers who wish to avail themselves of that. We also take it on ourselves to train staff of the projects and bring them alongside of us. We are soon to be launching the first ever W+ online learning course. It's also not just 2 hours, you have to expend some time to learn it. So we're trying to diversify and build the knowledge around the world of a team of experts that can apply the W+ standard to maintain the integrity and rigor of it. There's other challenges as well around, of course, building the market awareness of the fact that this already exists, even though we've been out there since 2014. It's still a challenge to tell people that we are out there and it's possible to measure women's empowerment and to receive a way to generate credits that have a saleable asset or a tradable asset. So having said that, W+ has been applied to dozens of projects, from biogas to biodiversity to reforestation, regenerative agriculture, etc. One good best practice I want to talk about is the one I think this really exemplifies for me what the W+ can do. Was applied to a biogas project in Nepal. There, the women were telling us that this project was transforming their lives, and in ways that the project developers who were implementing biogas had never thought about. And women said there are many ways this is happening, but their time saving was the greatest thing. Their time savings was not 4 hours a week, but 2.5 hours every single day for every single woman using the biogas. So those credits were sold. The money was provided to women's organizations in the project area. And then we were really keen to see, because they get to determine how to use that money. It's based on their own local needs and wishes. And we were just watching it. And what they did with it, we realized, was they were actually using it for climate adaptation. They were using it to fix water supply systems, to diversify their kitchen gardens, etc. So at that time, we realized this is a way to drive funding for climate adaptation, which is hugely underfunded in the climate world, through a climate mitigation finance through the carbon project initiative. So I think that was one best case thing. I would like to throw in one idea that came up in New York Climate Week discussions we had 2 weeks ago. What if we could think of women's empowerment, rather than being a co-benefit of carbon? What if we could reverse these things and have carbon as a co-benefit of women's empowerment and gender equality? I'll leave it with that.
Thank you very much. What a nice question to wrap up. I know this was a brief conversation. I'm sure there is much to be said and shared, but I would like to thank again our 4 wonderful panelists for joining us and for sharing your experiences and learnings. And back to you, Emma, for the questions and answers from the participants.
Yeah, so again, please feel, encouraged to either write your questions on the chat box or, come in verbally, raise your hand if you want to ask a question. And I'm sure the panel will be extremely grateful. I don't think I see any hands raised.
I saw Sue's hand. Yeah. Up.
Yeah. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, just because no one else is. I'm never want to miss an opportunity when I got some great people here to ask questions. Actually, this is the question for Claire on Gold Standard, because congrats that you got your first credits sort of under your first gender responsive project. And I saw the blog on that. It was great to see. And so I guess my question is around, I don't know if it's too early whether any of those credits have been sold, but I'm really interested to know if they have, or if not, if there is an expectation about the gender price premium. Because, that says a lot about how buyers, how much are they prepared to pay more of a premium to get these sorts of co-benefits.
So the credits were issued to CO2 balance, and so they have a number. So I think they've sold a number of those credits off in bilateral agreements where I don't have any exposure to pricing. However, they also sell those credits on our online marketplace, and there's credits that have been sold. So they've had, I don't know what the top of my head, how many credits have been sold for our marketplace, but they have sold credits, and they're there at a price of $25 per credit.
Thanks. And I guess, can you tell us, and people perhaps not so aware of sort of gun pricing, is that, does that represent a premium?
Okay, yeah, all right. So let me give you, so this is a safe water supply project. So we did, and this was quite a while ago, but we did like a pricing modeling exercise. We worked with Fair Trade, and we have a Fair Trade climate standard. And so they were looking at what would be a minimum price for a fair trade credit. And so a minimum price for a fair trade credit in energy efficiency, including water supply, is $12. And so it's double what that minimum pricing was, to put it in context there. There's, in terms of pricing more generally in the carbon market, that's a whole other challenge we could talk about for a long time. But yeah, hopefully that gives a bit of perspective.
Great, thank you.
Can I raise a point about this? This idea of linking it to a carbon credit comes up with us a lot. So our project developers have a choice. They can use the W+ as a standalone, or they can either put it with a Vera or a carbon standard. And they have the flexibility to change along the way. Right now, the pricing for W+ credit as a standalone is pretty high. And project developers are thinking that although there's a lot of talk out there about the value of it as a co-benefit, they may be able to make more money actually using it as a standalone. We're hoping that can change. But I think actually having the ability to move between as the market matures and understands better the value of such credits, it's a challenge to, as Claire was referring to. There's not a lot of history out there, and so one of the other challenges we have is to convince project developers to use the standard. Of course, they want to know what's the price, what's the premium, what can I make, what will it cost, etc. And we're in the early days of this, and I think we're still needing to prove out the price point for both of these things.
And it's harder, right? Because to apply the additional criteria that is required to look at some of these like topics and like it's more MRV, it's so monitoring, reporting, verification. It's more work for the project developers, so they need to understand what's their incentive to do it. So are they going to get that money back? And so I think there's a lot of work we can do about education to a kind of like more broader market, like what do these projects mean, what can they deliver, how can they help? So I think there's a lot more we can do around raising that awareness.
And I think all of us want to see that there's additional revenue raised so that projects have more money to use to raise their level of ambition for women's empowerment, gender equality. We've seen this in a project in Brazil, an agroforestry project, that it was a woman project developer who was able to sell the W+ credits and then use that revenue to in fact scale up the level of activities. That's exactly what we want to happen.
Exactly, it is.
In all of our cases, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I may add, we see that as well with VCS projects that use our joint programs. That is one of the benefits, and we know that the additional cost of doing that additional certification can be relatively high, just because, again, it is a whole other set of indicators that have to be verified and a whole other set of monitoring that has to be developed. But we do know that does generate a higher price on the market, and we know buyers are interested in seeing how projects are providing not just benefits to the climate, but benefits to the community and the biodiversity in the area. And projects that have this additional gold level CCB, where they go above and beyond even the regular CCB requirements around women's empowerment and gender empowerment and inclusion. And so we do see that the market does want this. And so I think really our role is going to be able to, how do we, as I mentioned before, how do we marry these requirements on top of additional benefits, so that we can have this base level. Every project must design their project in a way that provides gender equity, but also how do we show that not only do we provide gender equity, we're also providing these kinds of opportunities that wouldn't happen as a result of project activities. So we do know the pricing of having these additional benefits or these additional ways of demonstrating benefit to a community do have a positive impact on pricing of VCUs and pricing of credits. And so we hope to see that continue in the market as buyers continue to value those benefits as equally to carbon benefits.
Great. I think, I wish we had more time to continue this extremely interesting conversation, but I'm afraid we have to move on to the last part of the agenda. So, and again, for this part, I would like to welcome back Elizabeth so she can analyze opportunities and next steps. So thank you, Elizabeth. I pass the floor to you.
Thanks so much, Emma. I appreciate that. So what I'm going to do, I know we are at our limit now. So we had a quick couple slides on next steps and opportunities. So I will show them quickly. I'm not going to go into detail because I realize that now we're over time, but that was just a really good panel discussion, and to let the panelists actually communicate it and just listen. It was really interesting to hear that. So I'm really appreciative of that. So thank you so much. But basically what I just wanted to show here really fast, and again, we'll share these slides after this workshop with all the participants here, and we'll also post it online. We really just wanted to show here through these three different sources of information that Sue mentioned. So the report, the 2022 report, the June 1st stakeholder dialogue UN-REDD had with women and gender-focused organizations, as well as the e-discussion we had in October. They really drew out some key entry points on gender in the VCM. So building off where we are today, what's been done, where everything stands on gender, what more can be done. And so we tried our best to organize this as coherently as possible, because there are multiple entry points that can be discussed across these 5 categories. So increase VCM access to women, integrate gender more comprehensively in VCM standards and projects. There's also a need to create demand for carbon credits, so that where we do see there is a demand, that I think building more capacity and knowledge on the benefits and the value added of doing so, could be improved upon. There's also a need on this note to increase market awareness. And then, of course, to also increase in national level engagement on this issue to show why it matters. Clearly, there's all these different rationales on its importance that I discussed earlier, but that also needs to be done at the national level as well. And there needs to be a desire from those, at the national level as well as the jurisdictional level, wanting to undertake steps to promote gender too. So these are all different also activities that are listed under these 5 categories on how this can be done. And again, this is just start to scratch the surface on next steps, but we hope that at least under the UN REDD program, we can help to continue to facilitate this. And one key way that we are doing that is also we've created an online community of practice on gender and VCM. And this was launched in June of 2023. And it's just creating an online space for different parties, stakeholders to come together to talk about this topic, to share knowledge, share frustrations, challenges, opportunities, have frank discussions on it, because that's definitely necessary. And also just to collectively come together to try to help address some of these gender gaps in the VCM. And so we started off with 33 members, and we have increased membership. I think we're about now at 50, and that's great. I would very much encourage all of those that have attended today or that are listening in later to please join. Join the work. One of my colleagues will put the link to the community of practice in the chat box, but you can also, the link's also provided here. It's the first link that's provided. All you have to do is click on the link, fill out takes 2 minutes to fill out, and then become a member and hear some of the discussions that are happening. If you're interested in learning about the community of practice but don't yet want to join, you can also click on the second link provided here. It just provides a brief overview on how it works. So the more that we can get talking about this issue and sharing ideas about how to move forward with it and next steps, the better. And so with that, I'm going to stop there. And for those that are still with us, we just have one quick end of workshop survey in Zoom. It has 3 simple questions. They're listed in Spanish, French, and English. So if you would like to just provide any of your feedback for those that are still here with us on what you thought of it, that would be great. And I see people are, filling it out. And it's just, once again, I just want to thank all colleagues that participated, all of our speakers. It was so great having you, and thanks for taking the time out of your day. And I hope this is just the start, working together and kind of figuring out how we can, basically, the gender it's a win-win situation, looking to improve gender and integrate gender and women's empowerment in the work that we do. So it's just trying to demystify all this. How do we do this, and to debunk what's often seen as a tedious add-on when it doesn't need to be. And so I think it's just continually sharing knowledge and frustrations and feeling realistic ways forward, because the information needs to come from both sides. So to find the most constructive way of doing that. So it's appreciated. So
Beth, I see colleagues are filling the poll. Meanwhile, can we ask others to turn on their cameras and perhaps have a picture of just as backup for the event and visual representation of this interesting dialogue?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. I think with that, I'm going to end the poll. I think we got some good, helpful feedback. And again, thank you very much for that. So I'll stop now. So great. So perfect. And I'm just sharing the results. So overall, I think we heard some good, helpful feedback. We appreciate that. And looks like this helped to, address a needed gap. And I think, so where I think thought we could go a bit more into details, and we hope maybe we can do that then on the community of practice. So it's much appreciated. Okay, so with that, I'm going to take a quick screenshot on the count of 3. So 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. And with that, I bid everyone a great rest of your day and evening, and take care. And I hope, that we can continue discussions more moving forward. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.